take off on Monday.
Salesforce
So
moms,
we'll see.
they have one
I don't know.
speakers, topics.
A little bit scary.
I know
Like flows are
people
already,
it's
I
really
don't know.
good.
It makes it so user friendly. I mean, we're looking around government itself, but makes it so user friendly that if you don't walk in with some data architecture mindset, you can really screw up your software, screw up your else. Yeah, for sure.
Search.
Yeah, it's my first semester. I would be worried when you use
Yeah, they're here. I've been looking. Okay. It's her. She's like the one of the leaders, the girl in the pink. I'm looking for her. Without having to go through the fire. Maybe there's a way to join.
Not sure if we're running yet or not. Looks like it's time. All right. Well, hopefully we got a stream going for the show. If not, they'll come and let me know, I'm sure. All right, let's party. 3 o'clock. We're almost there. This is my first Cactusforce, so I don't know how big these things are, if everybody's exhausted. I love that this is a one-day event, because the 2-day ones, everybody's like toodaloo, so hopefully y'all are hanging tough. Thanks for coming to my show, Flow and Code, Living Together, Mass Hysteria. We're gonna look at a lot of code and a lot of flow today. So I have like 3 slides, they're all corny, but just to capture your attention. And then we're just going to thrash through some Scratch orgs and take a look at a bunch of examples. So I'm Tom Petros. I'm the founder and CTO at Red Argyle. We're a Salesforce consultancy. We're based in upstate New York, but we've got people everywhere. We were founded in 2010 and still cooking, so that's cool. I also run this goofy stream on Twitch called You Can't Do That on Salesforce. It's my muse because even though I'm the CTO, they don't really let me touch things at work anymore except for a broom to sweep the floors. So I use this as a release to build, frankly, really goofy stuff that doesn't belong on the platform, much of which I'll show you today. So, and we'll use as examples. So feel free to hit the QR code. It'll take you to my webpage and you can go see stuff. All right, so like I said, we've got this session and we've got the keynote. And then we've got one, I think the most important thing at the end of all this, tacos. So I don't want to keep you from the tacos and the keynote, but we're going to get through this content, as quick and as well as we can. Please ask questions as they come up. Like this is, I've got a slew of stuff that I can show y'all. If we get stuck and run out of time, no problem. If we got extra time, we'd love to just capture questions in real time as we go through all this. All right, by a show of hands, who knows this movie? Good. I don't feel as out of place and out of touch here. So, is the stream working?
We need you to share your screen.
Share my screen? Okay. Do I do that?
See if you got to go back to StreamYard.
Yep.
Hit present.
Hit present. Share screen. And go.
And then,
Can I do the entire screen? Yeah. Is this good? All right, cool. All right. All right. Sorry, internet friends. We'll get back into this. All right. Ghostbusters, 1984? I don't know. 84. All right, good call. So, yes, this is from Ghostbusters. I always thought this was just a clever quote that Bill Murray had in the movie, so I've been trying to find an excuse, frankly, to use it. And it feels like the code and the flow worlds are sort of like, the same thing at odds with each other, and now they have to coexist. And we've all kind of taken sides a little bit, maybe. Some of us are pro flow, and some of us are pro code. That's cool. We've all got to find a way to meet in the middle, though. So that's what we're going to try to do today. Show off some stuff that maybe you used to write code for that you could do in Flow, show some stuff off that maybe you're doing in Flow that's kind of like, wow, that's really creating like these spaghetti Rube Goldbergian kind of flows that we can maybe harmonize between the two. So first thing I want everyone to know is Flow loves code, and we'll show how the two can work together. Flow can ask for what it needs to from some code, and code loves Flow. So we can call Flow from Apex and get some stuff that's surfaced a little bit easier, a little bit more visible to our administrators, a little bit more configurable. But I think what I want to stress is the sum is greater than the parts, right? That old cliche. I really do think it's true with Flow and code. It creates this really nice relationship and communication interface between administrators and I'll say low-code developers and say pro-code developers to figure out where their parts are in a project. It does, in my opinion, it all does kind of circle around Flow, like it's eating the world, it's where things are going. But there's a lot of ways to bring everybody to the table, get them to work on their respective parts, and we'll take a look at examples of all that. That's it for slides. Let's go look at some code. So let's talk about Flow loves code. Who here has written an invocable? Some folks. Of those who have read invocables, how many are you sort of like full-time developer engineer people? Okay, so some and a little bit of overlap. So invocables for folks that are more kind of on the Flow side of things, more on the admin side of things, it's Apex code that can be called and configured from a flow to perform a specific action, take parameters from the flow and give them back to the flow when it's done. So why is this great? Because sometimes the alternative, I don't know how many of you have had to write a flow that did a loop, and then in that loop it did another loop, and then in that loop it had to do another loop. My stance on this is if you're looping more than twice, you probably want an invocable to do some work for you, because it might mean that you're looping just for the sake of counting stuff, or you've got this index that you're trying to match the index for in the second loop, and then you combobulate stuff at the end. And thankfully they took away the limits of how many elements you can execute in a flow, but that doesn't give us permission to write these crazy whirlpools of flows, as I would call them. So enter invocables. Again, what do? They do one job really well. You pass some parameters and you get something back. You need a developer and an admin to spend some time together to build those. So enter also one of my first ridiculous nonsensical projects from You Can't Do That on Salesforce, Uno. Why not? I built a lot of games. I built Rock, Paper, Scissors. I built Monopoly. We're currently working on a role-playing game because I just look for ridiculous use cases to build stuff with. But also built Uno a little while back. And what I want to, we won't show the game too much, but we'll come back and look at a bit of the UI in a while. But let's talk about some of the invocables that are running in here. First, if you're building a game, you need some random numbers, right? You got to shuffle decks and pick sequences, who goes first, those sorts of things. So this is an invocable that just gives me a random number. Kind of boring, right? Does anybody have a Salesforce formula that can give you a random number without having to determine the phase of the moon and what was happening on January 1st of 1860 and decide your time? No, the answer is no. But Apex is really, really good at doing a lot of the stuff that you can't get at in a Salesforce formula, or at least not be able to get to without kind of a crazy, pyramid building, very complex logic. Math.random here is literally all we're calling to get a random number back, and it's a number between 0 and 1. You can do whatever you want with it. In our case of Uno, we use it to shuffle decks and sequence cards. We won't get into a ton of detail there, but I can show you what this looks like in the flow, and we'll take a look at a couple other ones that, also we'll talk about how they add value not only to just by giving data back, but how to manipulate collections of data too. So let's get in here, take a look at our flows. And this one is in, I believe, Great New Turn.
Is that invocable output only?
You can input as well. Yep, you can. Oh, and this one just output. Yep, sorry, good question. Let me clarify that. So, we'll look at another example where we pass input to an invocable, but this one is just returning a list of decimals. Why list? Why not just one value? Because everything is bulkified in flows, right? Even though we think about them executing in terms of 1, we have to assume that it could be 1 to 200 and let the platform do what it does. But when you get down to this level, you got to talk in terms of lists, or even lists of lists, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So that's why we don't just return a decimal here. We're sort of like, this is going to get called, and it might shuttle us 1 record or 200 records at a time. So that's why that's set up that way. I picked the wrong flow, so let's try to find another one here. Here we go. So shuffle game cards. This is Uno. We're starting a game. It shuffles the deck. It doles out cards to all the players. Everybody gets 7 to start with. It gets to this step in the flow, and it says, I need a random number. So I'm actually going to go to another flow, if I can bring this up. Selected action. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the shuffle cards invocable. No, that's not what we want. We'll take a look at that one in a second. Shuffle players. Nope, we don't want that one either. Sorry, I thought I had this one right up here. Let's not, I won't belabor it much longer. We'll take a look at another one just to talk through it. Yep, all right. I can't show you that one. I thought I had it in here, but it's not in here. That's all right. Let's move on to another one here. This one, get records by index. So, how many times have you gotten a collection back from within your flow, and you've got 20 or 30 records that come back, or some inordinate number? You really just want the first one, or the second one, or what have you. Sometimes the way you're interacting, you're always getting a list back no matter what, but I really just need that first thing back. That can be kind of a pain, right? To isolate that first record and then go do something with it. So what this invocable does is it lets you pass in all the records that you're dealing with, and you can tell it what index you want to get back. So if I look at the request down here, you can kind of see I'm passing in records of any kind as objects, and then I pass in an index of which one do I want, so I can get the 0, the first, the second, the what have you. Now let me see. I hope I can find this one in one of these flows. I had everything down in the script except like, hey, where are these things? Here it is. So in this case, when we're in Uno, we need to know if we got to like the end of the hand, right? And then we need to issue you more cards. So what this does, this is the get record by index invocable. So when I create an invocable and it has parameters I can pass in, it shows them to me. So this is flow reading the invocable and saying, oh, you want me to take a list of records and you want me to take an index. So because it's a list, it's going to expect a collection. Right? I can't just pass one record in there. Index, it's a number. It's happy to get past whatever it wants to. And then when we get this back, what's kind of nice is your, let's see, I have that here. What I get back, and I'm not seeing it right now, is this action essentially has the resulting values as something that you can select, as if it were a record, right? I get an account and I want to get first name. Count.first name is the flow value that I can get back for that. So they don't become this mystical thing. They're actually data points that you can interact with. So it might be, I don't have it set up as a, so this is the output that comes back. So if I flip back over to my code, what we're returning is just a list of, we're returning a list of records. Again, we just want to return that first record, but it's technically a list. And this is the output that comes back. So I could map it to a different value if I wanted to. So these invocables, why do we bother, right? Because I've got one person working on the flow, and in the past, I might have another person working on some code that's kind of complex and could feasibly do all the stuff that the flow could do. what's nice about Flow? It's visual. I always like to say it's elevating the business logic, right? It's making it more accessible to a wider audience of people. I don't have to go into Apex and tell somebody who's less code savvy to, oh, I'll just figure it out, you know? Because yeah, I totally perfect with my code commenting and documentation, right? No. So this at least surfaces your business logic, which is my whole kind of shtick with Flow. Like, yes, it can automate, yes, it can execute, but I want it to be more visible. I want to be able to see more of what's going on, and I want to be able to configure it. I'm not saying that nobody works in production, right? Nobody changes a value once in a while until your boss says you need to. Okay, yeah, you might need to do that. So I'm not promoting that, but you can do that. You can at least see it a little bit better. So what's the job of the developer become? Writing a whole bunch of these invocables in support of the administrators, right? And writing some abstract stuff. So you're not like saying, here, I'm gonna run a very specific business process in this invocable for you. No, the things we've looked at are give me a value, pull something from a collection, give me the nth thing. They're all very sort of abstract commands that we want to let our administrators and our flow builders be able to work with. So I think this is going to be a large aspect of development as time goes on and as the flow ecosystem gets bigger and bigger. And I would say you're living in a good world when a developer has a huge library of invocables that an administrator not only can use but can understand how to use and can work through that and get what they need to. So it's a very iterative process, because the alternative to some of these, again, would be those death by loops, right? So if you're doing death by loops, or you're just finding yourself kind of stuck with a data structure that's like, I don't know how to get from here to there, talk to your developer, because maybe an invocable can bridge the gap for that. Any questions on invocables before we keep on trucking? All right, cool. So the next thing I'd like to show is flows and Lightning Web Components. How many people are familiar with the term reactive flow? I don't know if you've seen this recently. Super cool stuff, right? Love it. This is another reason, like, we gotta do more flow, because it's like, I can set a value and then a magic thing magically changes, right? Like, that used to be like some work in an LWC. Just as trivial as it may seem, a show hide can be like, somebody's gotta sit down and write that for the day. And the fact that it can also be reactive to the data that's coming back is super cool. So not only are flows reactive in and of themselves, they're reactive from a Lightning Web Component perspective too. They can listen for what's going on and see changes and update accordingly. So let's take a look at that. Again, I'll use Uno as the example, and I'll actually make this work, I hope. Let's go find our Uno game. All right, so we have an Uno game in progress. Uno is a collection of players, a deck of cards, and turns, essentially. So we're gonna go play a turn. And because I'm not very fancy, I still have to pass a parameter in my debug to play the turn. Okay, there we go, and hopefully, here we go. All right. The top card of Uno is what we're playing against, so that's in the top left. I've got a hand. I've got a bunch of wild cards, I guess, and I've got a 5 that I can play. Why? Because it's green. I don't really have any other options though, so they're all grayed out. So this is a flow hosting a bunch of Lightning Web Components within it. So we've got a couple that are at play here. We've got the top green, which we'll call Uno card. And it's just one card in the deck, and then we've got another one called Uno hand. Fittingly, that's the whole hand. Within Uno hand, we've got more Uno cards. So it's really a collection holder to loop over and show the cards within our hand. Repeaters are coming out for flow, which are also going to be super duper cool, but we can't loop over a Lightning Web Component yet, unless somebody in this room knows that that's coming and I'm just not aware of it. No, okay, cool. So because we can't loop over it, I need a Lightning Web Component to sort of hold the collection, tell it what I want it to show, and then it loops over hands and shows me the bottom here. So what's that look like? Back over to Uno, here in our LWCs. So here's our Uno hand. As you can see, it's just, and again, If you're not as familiar with code, it's still kind of intelligible. We're passing in a list of cards, and then we're looping over the cards. So that's what this for each is doing. The Uno card is just rendering the card. So again, there's some CSS here. We've got to give it a color. We've got to put the text in the middle, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we flowify these Lightning Web components? So every Lightning Web component comes with this meta file. If you've worked with Salesforce before, you've probably seen -meta files for all metadata in the Salesforce in your Salesforce org. This is no different, but the aspect of Lightning Web components that we use these meta files for is to kind of tell them what to do and what to play nice with. So in this case, we're telling this Lightning Web component, I want you to be available to flows. And so we just do this flow screen thing here. We'll come back to these properties, but essentially this is how we let the Lightning Web component communicate with the flow and back and forth. You'll see that we've got this role, input only, output only. Sound familiar? Those two checkboxes on your variables is just another variable, essentially, in your flow. If I flip over to Uno card, very similar. We're just passing a few less parameters. And again, we'll talk about the parameters in a second. If I go back over to our actual play turn flow, when I tell that Lightning Web component that it is available to a flow now, we'll see a slight change in our, I'll pick a screen here. We'll see a change in our screen configuration. We now have a custom section, and these are all visible. So this tells, because we put that in the LWC, it's now visible here. What else do we get? Well, we get some parameters. So this is nice because we can pass stuff from the flow over to our LWC. So I clicked on the hand, and you can see on the left-hand side, very consistently as with other components that you can drag onto a page, we got to give it an API name. Can't get away from that. I'm going to pass it the player's hand because that's what I'm showing. And then I also want to tell it what the top card in the discard pile is. Why? Because I need my hand to know what cards are playable, right? So we can gray out the ones that you just shouldn't play because the game engine knows how to play Uno, and now we're just waiting for the human to decide. The other thing that's here is there's also a Uno card. That's what's showing us the top of the deck. This one's a little bit more basic. We just pass it the card that we want it to show, and that's pretty much it, and it just renders it for us. Now, within Uno hand, I mentioned before, this is that same Uno card that we had in the top left. So we're looping over cards. So there's a little abstraction here. Like a card is a card is a card, whether I'm showing it to you as the top discard or it's one of the ones that's in your hand. So the benefit of that is now I can click on stuff if I want to, or not click, and they all sort of follow the same rules. So let's go back now to these properties that are being passed around. So these four here in Uno hand are what we're seeing over here. We're only seeing the inputs, right? It's not going to let us do anything with the output variables. So the first one, player game cards, and the second one, top game card. I'm passing those in. There's a whole bunch of data model to Uno, but you can kind of get the idea of what's moving around here. And then without going way down the rabbit hole of code, this is what really matters here, this flow attribute change event. So if for those that do write Lightning Web components, that's the sauce that lets your LWC let flow know that, hey, I got a change for you. Here comes my property. This, I had to bang my head against the wall for a long time because I just didn't understand the paradigm. My first thinking was, hey, if I just make a property in my LWC and I change the value of the property, magic happens and it's good, right? No, not exactly. You do have to line up the properties here with the properties in the JavaScript that runs your LWC, but you also have to use this event to send it back. And you use the same naming convention as what are defined in your properties. So all that said, what's the net effect here? I now have developers writing components in addition to their invocables that are managed in the flow engine. This could absolutely be its own standalone Lightning Web component application, right? I could have a big wrapper around all of it and do all of this on the inside. And that's not to say I'll never do that again. because we got a little bit of work to do on user experience here and how it looks and how, you know, all that. But we can get a lot of mileage out of what we've got here. So now that this is all in place, I can say, well, it's my turn. Oh, I can't play wild because the engine knows that you're not allowed to play these cards. So I'll play the, let's see. I don't know if it's going to work. I just fired up this org, but I would be able to play 5, and then we move on to the next step. I can also play no card because you're allowed to do that in Uno. So that's LWC's playing. You know, again, living in hopefully not hysteria, but harmony alongside within a flow. Any questions on that? Go ahead.
How did you find the answer to using the event that you had to do an event over and
Yeah.
you ran against the wall?
I just didn't read well, honestly. I'm totally guilty of bringing up Salesforce documentation and doing the skim and missing that one really important line that's in the middle of and that's not Salesforce's shame, that's my own impatience. And it's like, oh yeah, use this thing that, hey dummy, it's right there. So, but yeah, good question. I'm guilty of that with all kinds of stuff in Salesforce. Go ahead.
To add to that, I found out today that one piece I was missing out of doing this, because I was doing the event, was that the output has to actually be put into Salesforce's variable. Don't make a manual variable.
Yes.
Because those are not reactive. The manual ones are not.
Yeah.
That was the piece I was missing.
Yeah.
I found out today. I'm like, oh, okay.
Not all variables are created equal, exactly. Now, one other thing that I before we move on here, just to note, this is a pattern that sort of emerges when you use this Lightning Web Component approach, because, well, with the exception of some new stuff that some really smart people are doing with Flow, your execution of logic happens between your screens, right? You know, somebody's got a really sweet library out there that can actually let you do stuff right within the page. But we're not talking about that today. We're just talking about, if you didn't have that, here's what would happen. So with this model of having the LWCs, I find that a screen then has a decision immediately after it, because somewhere the logic has to happen to say, like, what did you just do? Did you hit play no card? Did you click a card? Did you pull one out of the deck? Whatever that may be. So then the outcome of that is, in this case, let's see if I can break this. So our components, all of those LWCs that we, actually let me find the name of one here. Okay, Uno hand, yep. So this is I'm not doing this to show you the logic, but just to show you the functionality. So Uno hand, just like any other component that you drag onto a page, now becomes data accessible. So because Uno hand returns certain values, I can pull those values from the LWC. And when they change, they're going to change in real time. All right. Let's see. What do we got next? I just want to do a quick sidebar on subflows. So this isn't really a developer administrator thing, though I think there's like a little bit of like flows hearkening to good practices of abstraction and single responsibilities that are reflected in subflows. So a couple of examples that I wanted to show here, just to kind of get the gears turning for folks. I'm going to flip over to another ridiculous game. This is YCDRPG, the role-playing game engine that we've been building. I've been building this for the last, I think, 10 episodes of the show. If you ever want to join the show, please do. I basically just tell bad jokes and stare at a screen and probably screw around with my beard too much. But we get a little bit of work done too. So the nature of this YCDRPG is there's a whole bunch of steps that have to happen, right? We have a game, right? And within that game, we have these quests, right? So like the first quest is the Dark Cave of Darkness or something like that. Within a quest, you have steps. So if you imagine like, Dungeons and Dragons, right? You walk, you fight a thing, you walk, you solve a puzzle, you walk, you fall in a pit, you die, right? That's kind of how it goes for me anyway. So each of those steps, within a step, we got some monsters to fight. So we got to create some monsters. Within that step, we also have rounds. So if I think back to like Final Fantasy days, right? For anybody play Final Fantasy Dragon Warrior, anybody like that? Oh man, less of a crowd than Ghostbusters. But so I have to hit the monster has to hit me, right? We call those rounds. We sort of predefine them, you know, in the background, like who's gonna, at least who the monsters are gonna attack. But the sequence of those kind of depends on how many heroes you have in your team and stuff like that. So we got to create all this stuff. And when I start a game, I gotta create a whole new game, right? But if I finish my quest, I gotta start a new quest. If I finish a step in my quest, I gotta create a new step. So these things kind of compound and go, you know, sort of go all the way downhill. So what you can see here, new game quest step, monsters, do. So why structure it like this? Because I can hit any one of these at any layer and it will cascade down. Now I can go, you know, when I finish the step, I just go to the step one and then boop, 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 those all run. Finish the quest, I call the quest flow and that one runs all the way down. The net effect is we get a little less crazy in each of these flows because we're sort of separating the responsibilities when we do this. It's not to say that new game is simple, but after I do all my setup of a new game and I call into that quest, I've got just a little less noise in my flows. So again, kind of helping prevent the Rube Goldberg effect here. I can isolate the responsibility to, all right, I'm going to create a quest now, I do some setup, and then I create the step, and then I create, and then I create. So rather than have one big monster thing that does all of this, we can divide. And I don't know how many, well, I think there's a handful of business processes out there that, if I bring this back to reality, right, like not just talking about building video games on Salesforce, there are plenty of processes out there that have to move, you know, to a subsection and rerun, right? So rather than having to drop this variable at the top of your Plinko, you know, board of a flow and say, I hope it gets there, I can isolate, you know, with some subflows and say, all right, I know this part works. I may only need to call into this to get the downstream effects to happen. So just a practice has sort of emerged that I find useful, and it makes it a whole lot easier to comprehend what's going on. I mentioned in the description of this session the notion of using flows for configuration, and that might have been a little bit of a misnomer, but I think let me show the spirit of that, of what we were talking about. So this other pattern I'm starting to experiment with is, hey, I've got settings in my org, and I normally need to go get them, right? And sometimes I find myself, I got a flow and a flow and a flow and a flow, and they're all different, and I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I need those variables, I need those custom settings, I need those custom metadata, what have you. So, I said, hey, wouldn't it be smart if maybe we just built a subflow whose sole purpose in life was to go get that stuff for us, and then wherever I need to do that, have those variables, they're just there, right? So that's the equivalent of a utility class in Apex, essentially. So this isn't like super exciting to, to look at, but I've got a contrived custom metadata value in here called colors. We put red, green, and blue in it because who knows, maybe we'll need them for something. But the whole point of this flow is to just get those settings. It's a subflow, so I can call it other places, and I've already got them ready. The nice thing here is if I get new settings or new things that I want to offer to all of my flows, they're here. So this really kind of becomes a data source for all of your configuration values. And you can go get some settings, some custom metadata, maybe an object that you use as configuration data. Do some random stuff in here. The IRS tax rate for mileage goes up next year. You've got that in here. I probably would put that in custom metadata or somewhere else, but you get the idea. So now I've got this flow, again, a subflow that I can take around with me and get whatever I need out of it. Yeah.
Do you know if there's any type of standard someone came up? So for object-oriented programming, will this kind of sub-nested level?
Yeah.
Or make a new method, or do you have an opinion, or is there anything out there for flows, like your flow gets this complex, you should do a subflow?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody has said, here's the right numbers. I honestly look at it visually sometimes. If I'm going down a path, and again, building these dumb things on the side, I kind of get to a point, it's like, you step back, it's like, wow, like this doesn't make any sense anymore. But I can see that this kind of like sub, function here could get pulled out and reused. The other thing I think is, again, those invocables, it can compress a lot of what would be steps in a flow down to like a single call. So it's just like visual noise for me is kind of what drives it. But and the reusability, factor. If there's really a sub process that you're going to use over and over again.
I think it's a pretty new question since they removed governor limits last year.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
never really had the ability to get super crazy up until recently.
Yeah, and now we've got like great power, great responsibility, problems to deal with. So you're right. You can get away with a lot more now, but should you? Right? Is sort of the question. So I honestly I think just take that step back and say like, does this make sense anymore? Or in 6 months I look at something as like, I don't know what this is doing. Like, okay, maybe a refactor is it's time for that.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Just use case. So I often come across where we need to use queue memberships to get like the queue email to send things out, and big flow. Every time we have to run through all the queue emails and then go into the flow, even if they're not going to use them. Would you do something like this with a subflow, or actually it might work better with the vocal Apex class? I'm curious.
Yeah, so maybe one, maybe the other. The first thing that comes to mind with those queues is like kind of crosses that like DML non-DML boundary, which can be fun in flows because you got to do something asynchronously because I can't do those two things at once. But I could see arguments, maybe for both. I couldn't say offhand, but I do sometimes find that those non-DMLs, maybe you do got to sneak a little bit of invocable logic in there, or at least definitely do it asynchronously. All right. Let's talk about why code loves flow. So if I back up 1 second, so at Red Argyle, so I'm a recovering developer. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't get to write a lot of code anymore. I basically just operate a company, and it's not as much fun. I still have to scratch that itch once in a while. But one thing that I do still maintain in our sales, or at our company, is our Salesforce org. So we're a professional services company, so we do everything in Salesforce. We got to eat the dog food, right? Like I can't provide this service to customers and be like, oh yeah, we use Basecamp or something Monday for our project management. Like they'll look at me like I'm crazy. So we got to do it. And I don't say that, oh shucks, it's like, yeah, cool, because I got a bunch of smart people back there that love to build stuff. So, but I haven't written probably more than 10 lines of code in the last year within our Salesforce org, because I'm trying to bang that drum. Like I have a lot of engineers who came right out of college. They're like, I want to sling code till the day I die, because they just love the thing, whatever dopamine hit they get from writing code. I used to get it. I'm not calling anybody out, but guys, the flow, right? The flow. Like the platform gives it to us. Like it's for all these reasons we talked about earlier. Got to go there. So I've been trying to again talk about eating dog food, like resisting writing code, converting triggers that we used to have into flows, because I don't write triggers anymore. It's my unpopular opinion maybe, but reasons are running out. And just trying to move into flow wherever we possibly can. If we have a new request or a new feature, it's going to be a screen flow, even if it needs a little bit of this customization. It's going to be an automation. It's going to be a flow that gets called somehow, record triggered, platform event triggered, something like that. It's going to be a call out. I'll show a little bit of that in a second. Like, you didn't write your call outs in flow now, don't write it in Apex. But there's some exceptions. We'll talk about those in a second. So I say all that because A, it's the direction the platform is going, right? B, I gotta promote that amongst my young people to let them know that this is the direction that the platform is going. But there may still be times that you got some code that you need to write, or you got some legacy code that needs to do a thing, and we can't get rid of that right away. But maybe what we can do in the spirit of surfacing business logic is have the Apex call the flow, right? So why? I can see it, and again, I've got some very, very slim logic in my Apex that used to be, I don't know who's converted like a trigger to a flow. Anybody gone through those steps? Yeah. So you look at your trigger and it's sort of depending on what trigger handler library you used, it was as clean or as ugly as, as possible. But then you just like, all right, I need to translate this code into flow logic. So, but what I need still is some way to kind of kick it off, right? And my way to kick it off may not necessarily be, record triggered flow or something like that. I still need that code there for some reason to kick things off. So we can call flow from Apex. We can pass it parameters, we can get parameters back. I feel like a broken record saying this, but like with LWCs we can do that, with invocables we can do that, just with straight up Apex we can do that. So let's take a look at what it looks like to call a flow from Apex. So I actually have this. This concept arose back at work. It was who's written a batch class in Apex? All right, cool. So you know that you can pass a bunch of data into it. You can tell it how many records to process at a time. If you pass it a batch size of 1, you're only processing 1 record at a time. You save yourself on some governor limits, etc. So we were doing a lot of that, and what we were finding was, hey, I gotta write this very specific batch job, and then I gotta deploy it because it's code. I gotta make sure that the unit tests are up to snuff, and then I gotta get it out to different environments just to run something in a batch mode and do some data processing. So we thought, hey, maybe we could use flows to handle whatever the guts of that batch is doing, and maybe we can write this in such a way that we can pass it any flow we want. So we've got this engine that we call mass batch that's sitting in our production org, and then we write flows. Flows have a name. We know the parameters that go into a flow. So I can just kind of summon mass batch and say, hey, you know all those 20 million accounts that are in this org? I want you to change all of their favorite colors to red. So in order to do that, change the colors to red, the business action that we want to occur, we write a flow that takes an account in as a parameter, changes the color to red in the logic, and then passes it back. And then the batch can just accept those flows by name and by parameter and execute whatever we want. So I won't show the code for how that's working, but let me show the code for how we call that. So we've got this thing called mass batch. This is a custom class. We give it an action. What do we want it to do? Oh, and by the way, to back all the way up, the other thing we used to use this for was what we would call wumping. I don't know if anyone's... So wumping was touch this record so the triggers would execute against it. And it would update the data, right? Or make that call out again, or do whatever. So you didn't want to take any action on the record, you just wanted to do that again, right? Like change the modified date, and it would save and do all the save actions. So we have the ability to update, and we also have the ability to delete with this function. How many records do I want it to process at a time? This is like batchable kind of stuff, right? So 1 to 200. I'm running this 1 record at a time. What object? So now we're doing SQL or SOQL, right? So what object, an account, what filter? It's just some SOQL where clause stuff. Nothing exciting there. Now here's where it gets interesting, right? This add flow call. So mass batch demo. If I bring that up. I don't know if I'm in this org already. I think I was. Yep. All right, here's mass batch demo. So this is a, I'm forgetting what they're called now. It's a flow that, it's not triggered. What is that? It's just a flow. Yes, thank you. So, it's not. This isn't record triggered. This isn't event trigger or anything like that. It's just sitting in the org, and it's like, yo, I got business logic you can run anytime you want to. It takes a couple of parameters. If you want to play nice with mass batch, you have to pass an input record and an output record parameter. That's kind of the interface for, if you do these things, I will run for you and I will give you an updated record back. This is the boringest flow in the world. It's very important business process is to make the URL of any account that you pass at cactusforce.com. So very boring, but you get the idea. We could have much more, sophisticated stuff in here. So this is mass batch demo, and I'm saying when you run mass batch against whatever records you pass into me, have it run that flow against each one. So what have I done? I've taken all the code that I would have had to write in a very specific batch and offloaded it to Flow, which I have, again, much more accessibility, much more visibility, right? It's easier for admins and low coders to get the sense of what's going on, and MassBatch is just the engine that gets things in and out of there. So the other thing that I can do is I can chain flows together, right? So if I've got 3 or 4 of these that I want to change the description, then just a terrible example, right? But you guys have much smarter business needs for this stuff. I'm going to change the description in one flow. I'm going to change the website in another flow, and just chain these together, and then they just keep going in and out. It just says record, and then it and then comes out the bottom. And then if I said update it, or if I said, well, probably wouldn't pass a record through a bunch of flows and then delete it. Like, that's kind of weird, but from an update perspective, that's what I would do. So if we run this real quick, so I'd love to get to one more thing. I want to check. Here's what I'm going to do. I got this script here that wipes out all the fields that we're about to mess around with. All right, thank you, demo gods, for not failing me. And let's just take a quick look at the records that we're dealing with here. There they are. So these are all the accounts in the org. Their description is null. Their website is null. So let's run without dog fact description. I'm sure you guys are wondering, what the heck is he talking about there? Let's run this code. So it's a batch, so it queued it, right? It didn't run automatically. It's only a batch of 3, so it should go pretty quick here. So let's rerun our query and see what we get back. And again, hope that the demo gods are in my favor. All right, cool. So we set Cactusforce.com on all of the records that had account at the start of their account name. So again, all my business logic, worst business logic in the world, but it's in there, is all in Flow, and MassBatch is just doing the engine work for us. And then, like I said, I could stack those.
So are you basically using the Flow as a helper then?
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, it's just, it'd be, yep, if I had a bunch of utilities or what have you, or static classes, like, I could do like an interface and some typed stuff, but hey, why not go that far and just take it all the way up to the Flow?
So the batch is not actually in the flow, right? The batch is in your class.
Correct. The batch is a batch.
One at a time.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And you call that batch however you need to. You write a flow that calls batches and a batch that calls flow. Right.
You said you could chain them together.
Yeah.
Have you ever hit, how many are the most you've chained together?
I mean,
What are the repercussions of just?
going forever.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you.
just seeing it.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Like 25, right?
There's a session that you're all not in right now about flow performance and like, is one flow or multiple flows better? I haven't done any kind of stress testing against this, but I honestly would be curious.
And then,
Yeah. Yep.
I've
Exactly.
heard them speak about that before, but I don't think this would.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a good question. So we use this to do like nightly data reconciliation essentially. So we take all of the time that our consultants worked on, we store it and aggregate it. A lot of this could be CRM analytics, but we need it kind of in real time in some places. So it runs every night, does a bunch of tasks, and then we get good data after that. Go ahead.
The irony is I was on a phone call with my developer yesterday, and we have a flow that's generating out too many stock queries.
Yep.
Because there's just a couple of
Yep.
like that. So what the idea is to have a flow that calls the batch,
Mm-hmm.
and then the batch would send one row at a time
Mm-hmm.
into a second flow.
Yep.
That would do all its iterations. And
Yep.
everything. And if there's an error, then you get the docker report and everything. And so it would just be one at a time.
Yep.
And processing time is an issue. It's not a huge
Right.
one, but it's a complex in the flow that we were getting errors.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and this is the example we're talking about.
After we built this to do the wumping that I mentioned before, a lot of the data processing that we realized we're trying to do right in like natively in Flow, push it to its limits, and it wasn't even that the platform couldn't handle it. Like, we weren't getting errors. It was, again, just that mental, like, I can't handle what's going on here in this flow. So we took this approach of tiny little bite-sized actions. And again, whether you're doing this for MassBatch or just for your flows, you can sequence your flows, right, by an execution by object. make them as small as you can. You know, like that's always my mantra. If you're doing data processing in a record triggered state, I try to make them as small as I can, even if it's like, I mean, maybe not just one field change per flow, but like this one does these values and this one does this for some reason. Like if you can batch up or organize the execution in those flows by some purpose, just give them a good description, you know what's going on in your work. So, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to show my favoriteest thing in the world, which is HTTP callouts and flow. I think they're awesome. Maybe because I had to write 10,000 of them in Apex in a former life, and I never want to do that again. But let me show what this looks like, and we'll actually use mass batch to call it and do the execution. So I won't go into all the details of how you set one of these up. I'll show you how you kind of get started with one. You go here, you make an action, and then you hit this button down here, and it starts up the call out process. So I did a whole session at Northeast Dreamin' about this, so I won't go all the way through it, but if you can find that and want to listen to me ramble on about that, please feel free. But at the end of the day, what you end up with is, in addition to a bunch of other stuff that Salesforce does for you automagically, is you get a service. Let's see if I can, let me find this here. I get my call out.
Name credentials first, right?
Yes, you need the credentials, you need a permission set. Like, this is not totally trivial, like you gotta do some admin mojo to get there, because another head scratcher for me is like, why ain't it working? It's like, because I don't have access to actually run it, right? So even as an admin, you have to go a little bit deeper with the security around this. But what do you end up with? So you end up with another action in your flow, and for, I don't know how familiar everybody is with APIs, but you have to tell it how you're going to send it the data. You have to tell it what URL you want to send it to. You have to tell it what properties or parameters you want to send it, and then you got to tell it what you're going to get back. So Flow knows what the structure is of what's coming back. Otherwise, you just get this long, crazy string. You're like, I don't know what to do with this. So it's really cool, though, that Flow is like, tell me what you're going to get back. JSON format structure, right? Pop that in this field, and I will tell you what this data is going to look like when it comes back. So then you're back into, oh, it's just like an account. It has fields, or it has collections within it, etc. So I love this because, like I said, I wrote so much code that had to do this. And again, in the spirit of elevating execution and business process, there's a lot of business process implied in these HTTP callouts, right? You're getting data back from an external system. It's not trivial to have to call out from your Salesforce org to somewhere else because things can go wrong, right? Things can change in an environment you have no control over. So I don't want that stuff buried in code somewhere where a normal admin can't go see it and see what the changes are. So at the end of the day, we've got this API for getting dog facts, right? Super. I hope it doesn't give us any inappropriate facts back, but you tell it, hey, give me 1 fact, 3 facts, 6 facts. You can pass a parameter of how many you want. And again, in the spirit of mass batch, we can go over here and say, all right, let's set those descriptions of our accounts to some of these dog facts. So the other thing that's nice here is this takes away a lot of the responsibility of the developer to manage to do all the flow control around callouts, because there's some mojo in Apex that tells you when you're allowed to make these callouts and when you're not, and everything's going good, you're doing your work, and then bam, you hit one of these restrictions and like you're full stop. And I'm not finding that happening with this approach by having the callouts happening in flow, provided you're giving it enough space, right? Like I would always do it asynchronously, do it in a batch, do it in in an asynchronous call in your flow or what have you. So let's see if that worked. Did we get useless knowledge about dogs? Sure did. Spiked dog collars are used to protect dog throats from wolf attacks in ancient Greece. Who knew, right? I mean, that's what you came to Cactusforce for, and get some dog knowledge. So what happened here, we made HTTP callouts for every record that went through our batch to get some data, and we got it back into Salesforce. So again, another pattern to consider. I got a bunch more nonsensical stuff, but we're at time. I'm happy to answer any questions, hang out afterwards. If not, check out the show, check me out, do whatever. If you want to see some more code, most of it's up in GitHub, so it's all available. If you don't see something and you want to talk more about it, just let me know. Appreciate your time. Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh yeah, bring the thing up. Sure. There we go. Thank you. One thing I didn't get to show y'all, I leave it as a teaser, I don't know. I was trying to answer the question, wouldn't it be cool if you could call any Apex you wanted from a flow, right? So I started building this library called Apex Flow, which took all the static methods in the Apex developer guide and made them available to Flow. So you could call anything, it dynamically knew the parameters to pass in and what you would get back. So you could kind of, you could essentially start sort of writing code visually within Flow. So teaser, if you check that out sometime. But thank you again, everybody. Appreciate it.